there is plenty of seats in the first rank. And we will immediately start. And I would like to welcome you in your new meeting room. So that's the first day that we organize, first time we organize a meeting here. And we are rather pleased that we never had so many people interested by the topic of this monthly forum. And we have different hypotheses. Perhaps people of the Commission don't have yet a commissioner have more free time to attend, or they are really interested to have some explanation how the Commission is working in reality, and that we will have in the presentation of Miriam. But apparently it attracts a huge interest, and I think having the chance to read, I read one chapter about social policy and the internal market policy. I think even for specialists, as I can say, perhaps I'm a specialist of social Europe, I've learned a lot, and the book is not yet out. It should be out in next few weeks, and I just advise you to buy the book and read all the book, because really what I have seen is fantastic, something really important. It's also for the next monthly forum, we will have the presentation about is there a divide left-right in the European Parliament, and the two monthly forum have, I think, the same rationale, to have an analysis of social Europe on the actors, Commission and European Parliament, much more subtle than we had so far, and trying to open some the black box of the policies at European level, having different vision than just a legal one of what is happening. So I'm also pleased that you are in this meeting room, because we are free to decide the provider, and we decide to go for fair and organic. I spent 8 months in Berkeley, and there all is fair and organic, so I returned with the idea that we should have even fair and organic, and we will try also to have here some coherence between the discourse on just transition and what we eat and drink, so you have Oxfam stuff and social service provider for the food. So I'm not here to speak about the food and climate change. We have an interesting session in November about that, but to have the discussion about the book of Miriam, Agnes Hubert will be the discussant. You will present 30-35 minutes, then 10 minutes to discuss, but what we would like to have really here is an exchange with you. So Miriam, thank you again for coming, and I give you the mic.
Okay, so thank you very much, Philippe, for the nice introduction and the nice words on our forthcoming book. Actually, the book is a result of a collaborative research project I've been carrying out during the last 5 years, and which has been funded by the Volkswagen Foundation. And the project was first based at the Social Science Research Center in Berlin, and has moved to the University of Bremen. I would like to use the next 35 minutes to give you insights in 3 different parts of the project. I will start by outlining the puzzle and the question we actually have. Why is it interesting to look at power and conflict inside the Commission? I then jump directly to present some results, descriptive results on the process and at position formation and interaction inside the Commission. And then the third part will be to introduce what I call the analytical added value of the book, a typology of position formation processes inside the Commission. And I also will devote some thoughts on what we can actually take out of these typology for policy making in Europe. So let me start with the puzzle, or with the topic of the book, really. If we look at the Commission, we all know that within the EU political system, it holds a quasi-monopoly to propose legislation. And with this agenda setting power, it can define substantially, it can define the corridor for the later interinstitutional process. So it's relevant where the position of the Commission is as a starting point. Yet, we do not know systematically why the Commission at times proposes acts that later disembogue into fundamental opposition in the Council for Member States side, like the pending Framework Directive on Equal Treatment, I would say. Or why the Commission at times proposes very high standards or very low standards. Like if you look at consumer protection issues, sometimes they are up and sometimes they're very little. So why is that? Or even why sometimes acts are proposed that contradict other acts. An example might be the Liberalization of Services Directive and the Posting of Workers Directive. So why is that really? How is the agenda-setting monopoly of the Commission filled with action in the EU political system? Now, to answer these questions or to engage with this topic, we have to open the Black Box Commission and to look inside. And if we look inside, we find different interests. We find not only the usual suspects for market liberalization, like DG Competition or DG Common Market, but also portfolios which are much more interventionist mandate, DG Employment, parts of DG Enterprise that do industry policies, research and development, etc. Plus, all the people that work in the Commission, they come from very different professional backgrounds, from different countries, have different party political affiliations. So there are a lot of different interests inside the Commission. And we do not know as researchers how these different interests are aggregated. And that's our interest. Now you might say, well, is that really that relevant? I think it is. To give you an example, take the Liberalization of Services Directive. The Commission proposal was relatively market liberal. It was only in the later interinstitutional process that it was turned back a bit. Now, what happened inside the Commission? Were there simply no other positions? Or could then Commissioner Diamantopoulou not assert her position against Commissioner Bolkestein? And now, if we take this and translate it in analytical terms into questions on position formation inside the Commission, we raise two research questions. The first is, how is the policy position of a DG formed with regard to a specific legislative proposal, like our interest in substantial positions inside the Commission? And the second, how are different DG positions coordinated, and how can the assertiveness of a DG in forming the final Commission proposal be explained? That's a question about interaction in the Commission. Theoretically, we draw on two contrasting pictures that exist in the literature about the Commission. The first sees the Commission really as a technocratic body, Commission seeking efficient and effective solutions to policy problems that are out there, that arise with a crisis or whatever. That goes back to Weber's picture of a bureaucrat, and in EU studies it resonates well with Haas or Mitrani. The picture that contrasts with this is that of a political actor, an actor that uses policy making to maximize his or her own utility. And as a political actor is very much aware of the political implications of his action. And typically this view is associated with Downs on his canon in the literature. Now, having these two contrasting pictures of the Commission, we as well know, and we take that into account in our theoretical concept in the book, that the Commission does not act in a vacuum. There are a number of institutional constraints or resources, depending on how they are used. And these concern the legislative status quo ante, internal coordination, interinstitutional system, and optional resources like interest group, expert, but also public attention, etc. And we then argue that depending on how these, which of these factors and how these factors are used, we can learn something about the agency in the Commission, whether it's a technocratic or a political act in the Commission. So empirically, together with my colleagues Christian Rau and Julia Metz, we selected 48 legislative proposals, and we were interested in the process and the outcome of internal position formation of these proposals. The proposals are mostly directive, but also some regulations, And we selected them from the last 2 commission terms, like the last 2 complete commission terms, like the Prodi and the first Barroso Commission. And we intentionally selected legislative proposals with a broad scope and where we thought that at least 2 DGs were responsible for the topic. So you see that there are 3 issue areas. And in this presentation, I will focus on my area of expertise, and that's the intersection of common market and social policies. And among those 16 acts are the EU anti-discrimination directives from the time, it's public procurements, it's financial service regulation as a basis for many welfare products today. It's also service liberalizations, coordination of social security, etc. What we then did is we traced the process of position formation inside the Commission for each case to learn which of the factors are actually relevant. And then we systematically compared them across the 48 cases to find out what is typical for position formation and whether we can see patterns in position formation. The empirical data we draw on are mostly expert interviews within the Commission, making sure that for each act we would have at least officials working in different DG, 2 different DGs, and ideally at different hierarchical levels. And we combined that with a number of other information sources, and I would just like to highlight the internal data management SysNet, where each DG can indicate agreement or desired changes for a drafted proposal. And we had access to these documents for most of our cases. Plus, we constructed a new database on the EU Commission that holds both information on organizational features of DG and how they change over time, and personal characteristics of officials. And that database is online, the material is online at the Social Science Research Center, and we're very happy if you would like to make use of the material that is on there. So now I come to my second block from the presentation. I jump to the results and would like to first give you some information on what we found out about the process. Now, internal position formation is a complex multi-stage process that runs both horizontally and vertical inside the Commission, and it's long. On average, it takes more than 2 years for a Commission proposal when it first starts drafting until it's adopted in college. And what we found quite interesting is that if we correlate the time an act takes inside the Commission and the time in the interinstitutional process, it's a strong and statistically significant correlation between both. And that means that what goes on inside the Commission nicely mirrors and is indicative of what is going to happen in the interinstitutional process. It's conflictual, position formation is conflictual. We looked at the distance of the different positions proposed, and we found that on a 0 to 3 scale, it's an average 2 of conflictuality. And interestingly, we also asked actors that participated in the process their subjective assessment on conflicts, and that was much lower, which means that conflict is mediated quite successfully inside the Commission. When we come to substantial positions, we found that they're quite diverse inside the Commission. Out of the 48 cases in our sample, on 38 we actually found that DG substantially, not only in details, but substantially diverged on what was at stake in the directive or the regulation. Now, looking more specifically at the intersection of social policy and the internal market, we find that it's 12 out of the 16 acts where they held diverging views. And this is actually a map that shows you how often a DG was lead in it. So you have on that axis the lead now, how often a DG was lead in that policy area, and how often other DGs held deviating positions. And what you can see in this graph is that actually there are relatively stable conflict lines among a number of 3 or 4 DGs in this policy area. And while this, of course, is due to the case selection we hold, we also found it in the other policy areas, which means that typically 3 to 4 DGs differ substantially in a policy area inside the Commission. And that's interesting for research because the Commission is not a unitary actor, not at all. And only when we take the internal process inside the Commission into account can we understand actually why, at what point in a multidimensional policy space, a policy proposal is made. So we have to really explain what is going on inside the Commission. And I would now like to, skip that one, turn to explaining more what is going inside. And I will walk you through 4 of our cases, 2 for each research question. This is the first one on position information. And I will try to give you some idea about how we work, what are the factors that are important, and through which mechanism they play out. So the first case is supervision of financial conglomerates. Financial conglomerates are big financial groups that are active in different sectors at a time, so not only banking, but also insurance and financial services. And the first question was actually how to define these financial conglomerates, and the other question was how to supervise them, particularly if they active across borders. And this was a topic that had been on the EU agenda since the late 90s. It was already mentioned in the Green Book on Financial Services, but the DG Markt, who was had the lead, did not come forward as a proposal. Why? Because it was a very complex issue, financial conglomerates. There was no existing acquis in the area at the European level, and even in member states, most of them did simply not have regulation on financial conglomerates. What happened in this situation? DG Markt, and I cite an interviewee, was comparable to a blank sheet of paper, so they didn't have a strong own agenda. And they recruited a national seconded expert to the Commission who worked relatively freely on this proposal. And that expert was recruited from a member state that had a high level of protection, of regulation in the area. And he had also gained experience at the international level in the Basel Forum. And he could, inside DG Markt, quite freely draft the proposal. And this then was very much using the blueprint of the national model for the Commission. So that's a case that comes very close to this technocratic actorness. You have a problem, you look for a solution, you look for a policy template, and you take it to solve the problem. And this contrasts with the second case on cross-border healthcare, which is also known as the Patient Mobility Directive. And the core of this directive is the right to access to healthcare in other member states and then being reimbursed at home. And this case was closely connected to a number of ECJ rulings, particularly on reimbursement, and it was drafted in a context or closely connected to other policy-making processes going on. The Service Directive had initially contained a clause on health services that had been taken out, and so now the question was whether to regulate and how to regulate. It was a hot potato back on the table, and inside the Commission, DG Sanko very willingly took it up because they wanted to regulate. Being a relatively new DG with little legislative competences, they had an interest to take it and to make it a real health proposal, like they said. And they conducted a very open drafting process with a lot of influence from different stakeholders, being patient group, health professional organization, high-level groups they had created earlier, and which in many respects, at many points, we find that this took them a bit away from their ideal position on cross-border healthcare, and in some parts introduced less liberal positions because these high-level groups, for example, had already developed minimum criteria for what constitutes cross-border healthcare, and they then took them on board. And this process inside the Commission, position formation, was also very much characterized by active protest from commissioners and cabinets, both motivated by national interest and ideological beliefs about how to regulate in this area. In sum, what we see is that position formation is a much more political process, and we can explain it by looking at different factors than the first one. Now, Second question on the interaction, like who asserts a position on the basis of what power. Here, my cases, the first case is the Liberalization of Services Directive, very familiar probably to everyone. The core of the directive is a horizontal application of the country of origin principle, and it created a political outcry in the interinstitutional process, but the question is what happened inside the Commission before. And when we traced the process, we found that the drafting started in 2001, when a relatively new unit within DG Markt wanted to advance the common market and to put existing case law in a secondary legislative act. And they interacted on this during this drafting process with a number of other DGs, but mostly at the service level. So they were very much convinced by what they were doing and argued that it was really pouring ECJ case law into legislation. They wouldn't change a lot, and there was no political question attached to that at all. They found rather technical solutions, sophisticated technical solution, clarification, for example, between DG Employment and DG Sanko on the posting of workers. DG Markt simply said, well, there's no overlap, no problem for the posting of workers directive. For transport, for example, because DG Tran had higher regulation in some areas of transport, so they agreed to exempt these areas, etc. So little solutions were found, but no debate about the political dimension of the act took place. Then they walked through the political level, and for this, this political negotiation or discussion at the political level took place at a point in time where one would expect little changes. Why? Because it was right before Christmas break, and the college meeting was arranged for the first after Christmas brief. It was a Strasbourg week, so they had to squeeze it into a Monday meeting, and a lot of the people were just not aware of the dimension of the decisions that were taken. There was some discussion at that level, but not about the political dimension of the act. So for us, this is a case of very strategic acting less of the lead in getting a proposal through the Commission. The last case is the equal treatment framework, the one that is still pending in the Council. And here you probably all know that it covers a lot of different discrimination grounds, religion and belief, disability, age or sexual orientation, and extend these into a number of areas, most importantly into the access to and supply of goods and services. So the process started inside DG Employment in 2007. Why? Because the EP, the European Parliament constantly reminded Barroso of the fact that he promised to legislate in this area earlier on. And given that Barroso wanted to be re-elected, he had made certain promises, and now the EP reminded him to keep these promises. So that was one important reason to have the act. And Barroso was also interested in giving, or there was, put it a bit more general, there was a need for a social air in Europe because it was the time of the ratification of the Lisbon Treaty. This is like the side to have the act. But at the same time, earlier anti-discrimination acts had raised member state sensibilities and sensibilities in other portfolios inside the Commission. So there were these more member state-related sensibilities strengthened critical voices inside the Commission. Internal conflict lines reproduced that of earlier anti-discrimination acts, and DG Employment and DG Enterprise, for example. I have a nice interview quote saying that they were arguing until they were blue in the face about the things they had disagreed about earlier on. And they was, for example, whether to include disability, whether to include tourism and hotel, how strong complaint procedures should be, and also whether the private sector would be part of the directive, Verheugen's old lady clause. So that was very much motivated by German interests at that point. But DG Employment had prepared the field. They had a lot of stakeholder support. They had conducted a lot of studies and collected information where they could, at important points, show that actually it was not necessarily increasing the cost if one would have the directive. At the same time, it is an unusual case because it does have a strong degree of political intervention in the internal process. You have, in parallel to the inter-service consultation, but also inviting all commissioners, trying to garner political support, to have both an act that would be sellable in both directions, but at the same time not creating too much cost for industry. So again, this is a case of very political agency, but beliefs about what was right are much more important than just mere competence extension in this case. And this leads me to now take you to our analytical contribution, the third part, because what we found actually is that we had started off with these two theoretical views and the Commission as being either technocratic or a political actor. And in our cases, we often found that would not be fine-grained enough to capture what was actually going on inside the Commission. And thus, in a deductive, inductive reasoning, we came up with a threefold typology of position formation processes. So this is a typology about processes, not about outcomes, and that's important to note. And the first model or type or logic of how the agenda setting monopoly is filled with action is that of a technocratic actor who is motivated by efficiently and effectively solving a problem, and it's important that he doesn't have any predefined goals except that one of solving the problem. So the position formation is usually a process that is driven very much by expertise and knowledge, both from actors inside the Commission and from outside. And it doesn't matter so much who these actors are, but really what is the information they provide. Now you might ask, why in this case do we see conflict? Well, sectors might differ in their perception of what's a good solution to the same problem. So you do have conflict in this case too. And then interaction typically is that taking the shape of a coordination game, where you really see the exchange of information and arguments, trying to convince one or the other. And empirically, this is actually the model that captures best what is going on during the stage of position formation. But it's less able to explain or rarely fitted what we saw in interaction. The second model is one of what we call competence seeking, and that comes very close to these rational choice, Downs and Miss Cannon arguments I introduced earlier. And a nice citation to capture this is basically they, actors inside the Commission, do not really care about the policy substance. They are only concerned about how to pull all the strings that are floating around somehow together in order to achieve some outcome. So that means these processes are open in substance, and they pay attention to those interests that deliver political support or acceptance. Thus they are very much looking toward what is the council majority, what is the position of the European Parliament, etc. The interaction takes the shape of a zero-sum game, where each DG tries to win and the other one will lose. And they strategically, in this game, exploit resources at their disposal, be it formal coordination structure, the fact that they are leading the process, using extant legislation or, importantly, ECJ case law, and also public salience, working together with the media, etc. This is what we see in this type. And that is the second most frequent model when it comes to position formation, and it's the most important one when it comes to interaction inside the Commission. And then there's a third agency type, and that's policy seeking. The motivation is also political, but it differs from the competence competence-seeking model by the fact that actors have predefined ideological beliefs or or convictions about how solutions should look like. And these motivations in the EU political system typically are not party political motivations, but they are motivations about social justice and what is right in normative terms. So that's beliefs that we found. Given this motivation, when it comes to external interest, we find that those interests have access and influence that are close to these predefined goals inside the Commission. So where we see a normative fit, and we see a strong involvement of individual actors in these cases inside the Commission. Interaction is characterized by conflict and arguments about norms, and the power resources that are used to win the game inside are alliances around these beliefs, and often political leadership and entrepreneurship are important explanatory factors. And empirically, there are very few cases during position formation that can be best explained by this model, but it becomes a bit more important when we turn to interaction. And also for me, this model is quite interesting because it can actually explain our most extreme proposals in our sample. So to sum up a bit on this typology, you see that the process can change from the first to the second research question, like the type of agency in the Commission. We have a lot of technocratic problem solving, but then when it comes to interaction, what dominates is turf between DGs and sometimes ideological conflict. So that's what drives how to find common solution across portfolios. This typology is important with respect to the literature. Why? Because the literature typically assumes that the Commission is of either or type, while we argue that constantly these three types coexist, and that really this coexistence can explain the frictions in the legislative proposals, why we have these proposals that have high and low standards that contradict each other. And we really have to look at the factors that mediate between these three models to understand what is the specific position formation in a specific case. And in the project, we particularly looked at salience and uncertainty, like salience measured by public attention for a proposal and uncertainty about possible effects. And I'm happy to extend on that during discussion if you're interested in these factors. Now I would like to turn to my last point and try to think about what can be conclusions or takeaway points from this academic exercise. And I would like to respond to 2 points. The first is which policy for Europe, and the second, how to change it. Like which policy for Europe, if we look at the substantial positions that were then proposed in our 48 cases, what we find is not only that they're highly diverse, but, and that's hardly surprising, we see a strong free market orientation in most of them. So they do not address specific societal outcomes, but they rather delegate this to market forces in a lot of the proposals. We see very little intervention, direct intervention. Among the 16 cases I looked at, it's only the European Globalization Adjustment Fund where you do have a direct intervention from the European level. But, and this is what I would like to highlight, there's an important middle category. And this middle category is that of market steering, we call it. So what happened in this category? Often we had in earlier proposals that we did not study, like from the time before that, the Commission or the EU level had liberalized markets. And then there was question how to re-regulate them, and whether to re-regulate them only to cope with market failure, or more towards the interventionist side, also to re-regulate with an intention of creating other market outcomes that would be that would deal with an unsustainable solution, or that would deal with a situation that is morally unjust. And where in this re-regulation question, in this market steering category, whether it would be simple market failure, or more towards really looking at what type of outcome do we actually want. That's a question of power and conflict inside the Commission. So it's not an automatism, but it depends on what is going on inside the Commission a lot. And therefore, I would like to come to the point of how to change it, because we argue that depending on which of the three models you are in, you would need to turn on different, or to look at different factors to generate different outcomes. If we are in a technocratic world, where the liberal outcomes that are often proposed are due to legal consistency with earlier acts and problem solving across the logic of the common market, if you would want to have more interventionist policies in this setting, you could ensure more balanced access when it comes to experts and interest groups, including positions that would push for more intervention and provide information how to do this, or create legal precedents that could then be used as an information source how to deal with these problems. In the competence-seeking model, we argue that if you do have liberal positions, in this model they would flow from the interest of actors to extend their competences, and whether they can best do this with liberal policies because it's so difficult to get an agreement in the council later on, for example. So from this perspective, more interventionist solutions should look at internal distribution of responsibility. Who is the lead department for an act? To have a more strategic choice on this kind of questions. And also to look at that the existing coordination structures are not used for these are not used for the liberal interests, but also more balanced for the interventionist interests. And finally, the policy-seeking model. Here we say that ideology and belief system of individuals do make a difference. And now, if we combine that with our knowledge that the Commission is increasingly responding to external demand and public attention, what would be needed in this model is open political competition for leading positions, for commissioner, for the president, and this is starting, but also maybe for director generals. And if you are interested in more details about all this, here is the book. It should be out in a couple of weeks. Thank you.
Thank you, Miriam. Now, Agnes, of the floor. Agnes worked for a long time at DG Employment, and then to the BEPA. I think she just retired, so yeah, she is free to say what she wants about the Commission that perhaps not all in the room are able to do, and that's part of the reason we try to have someone who work at the Commission and can give comments, but also to be completely free about his vision or appreciation of the book.
Thank you. I think you are completely free only after 2 years. But don't worry, I feel I've been fairly free within the Commission. So, I will sort of, take the same view as you. I really feel I'm just putting the timing because I've got a tendency to speak too much. Okay. Yes, I will sort of, thank you, Miriam, for this presentation and for this book, which is really interesting. When hearing you, I was wondering, but it's the ideal guide for manipulators, right? For people who want to really sort of look into how they can sort of influence the decision-making process. And my God, there is a lot of people who try to influence the decision-making process in the Commission. But it is really a fascinating tale as well for insiders, and for some of the proposals you sort of detail. I've sort of been involved from far or nearer, but I really sort of think it's a really very, very interesting sort of tale. Shall I say it reads like a novel? Yeah, I'm tempted to say it because I'd like to sort of comment in two sort of parts. The first part, I'd like to sort of have almost a question answer with you, but I mean, asking you more about the sort of the little stories that you discover, which are really fascinating. I mean, there's a lot of little human stories, and this gives a lot of sort of human flesh onto the Commission's decisions. And in the second part, we'll sort of come back to sort of more sort of theoretical questions that you may already have sort of partly answered. So basically, I looked as well at only the social and market sort of intersection chapter. There are other chapters are
on consumer policy and on research and development issues, being partly the responsible DG, but also DG Enterprise and budget being involved all the time.
Okay. So I mean, this is just I've looked only at sort of really a small part, maybe the biggest part. I don't know, but I mean it's quite consistent as it is. Looking at the, I mean, you've got inside, you've taken a really very interesting variety of subjects. Basically, there are sort of three issues: the fundamental right issues with the directives on fundamental rights and gender equality, all the sort of I would say free movement of services with all the public procurement directives, etc. And the free movement of people with the service directive, the cross-border health, etc. An odd one out, on which we will come back, is the Globalization Fund. I couldn't put it into any categories, and it is sort of an odd one out in terms of the decision-making process as well. Very sort of a strange animal in that collection. Amongst the small stories, the way you retrace them in a sort of fairly systematic way is the drafting. You tell a lot of the stories about who are the appointed officials, who's actually drafting, is it the sort of service in charge, is it a coordination service, and then who sort of takes over after within the drafting. Is there sort of political in some state? I mean, in one of the examples, there is a sort of a political sort of retaking of the drafting, and so on. The pre-negotiations in some sort of difficult cases, how there is a pre-discussions between cabinets, or at least between some services. Then the press. I mean, the influence of the press is quite interesting, in particular in the when you mention for the professional qualifications directive that I mean was it Diamantopoulou and Bolkenstein sort of come out with an article in the Financial Times even before the directive is presented. Was that a lesson? I don't know if it was before or after. Was that a lesson from the gender equality directive, where the press had been really sort of pre-informed and had really played an important role in reshaping what the directive should have been? No? Just to remind you of some of the stories, the Gender Equality in Services Directive in 2003, the beginning was, I mean, as soon as the Commission started to talk about it inside, it seems that the Daily Mail was informed, amongst others, and the Daily Mail started to sort of publish a picture of Diamantopoulou in a bikini, saying those feminists of Brussels want to sort of avoid us publishing bum and tits stories, which our readers love so much. So this closed the chapter of having a gender equality directive for the media. Okay, for the time being, and it is still closed. And we just dealt with the insurance. The insurance were sort of active in other ways. Anyway, that's for all the sort of stories that one would find in your book. Then after the press, there is the stakeholders. Maybe if I had a reproach to make, I mean, I felt a little bit frustrated that the Commission is extremely open to sort of the outside. I mean, obviously there is not a lot of case about the social partners who have intervened not within the social dialogue but in sort of various, I mean, in more sort of informal capacities. Plus the role of the lobbies. I was mentioning the role of the insurance lobbies, for instance, in the gender directive, was amazing. I mean, you could see these people in the corridors of the parliament all the time, inviting commissioners or officials for lavish lunches, etc., etc. I mean, they were sort of producing their own papers and trying to sort of diffuse them through the system and so on and so forth. So it was just an example. I mean, sometimes it can be sort of green lobbies or others, but I mean, the outside lobbying is much, much stronger than we get the sort of impression from. Then all the process of the internal service consultation, maybe you can done more of it, but I mean, obviously there's a lot to say when you've sort of taken part in these inter-service consultations, because they are quite often not in the meeting itself, but in what happens before and after. They are very much one of the sort of main place where sort of new formulas are found and new for most of the directives. And then when the directive is sort of sent back to the drawing board, and then you detail as well, which is really interesting, some of the issues which are at stake. I mean, sometimes it's the question of the burden of proof, sometimes it's the GA Act, the Education and Culture, was trying to sort of place itself, what is it, in the, I can't remember, in the qualification directive. I mean, they try to sort of place himself as sort of legislators as well, as you mentioned for Sanko earlier. So this is really, I mean, the story is told in a very clear fashion, in a very sort of detailed fashion, even on very technical issues. So that's really something which is really appreciable. Then let's come to the European Globalization Fund in a few minutes, if we can. I mean, it was the first time there was a distribution of money to individuals which was involved, and redistribution of the European funds. At the same time, it was, I mean, sort of taking money back. Like there had been initiatives where the Commission had much more sort of command of the process of distribution earlier, but I mean, the member states had really taken through regional policy and social policy, that really taken back all the mastering of the regional policy. And then with the European Globalization Fund, the Commission is sort of taking back this prerogative of distributing itself. And there, maybe I would like you to sort of detail a little bit. Sorry, the time is finished. Okay, I'll give myself 2 more minutes. But I mean, how did it happen? I mean, there was certainly a political opportunity which was really very strong. Then it sort of went back to the issue of the marchandage. I mean, the member states being the net payer or not wanting to give more to the lowest paying, etc. I mean, this whole redistribution issues that come. So if you could maybe detail a little bit. Then very briefly, I'll come back to some of my questions, which may be less relevant after having heard your presentation. At the beginning of the book, I thought, well, I mean, this is going to be another discussion about the social market economy and which direction it goes. I mean, all the sort of discussions between the Müller-Armack school and the more Hayek school, and how do we sort of produce sort of social benefit from growth, or do we have to sort of regulate? One of the questions you ask, so far you say it remains unclear whether interaction between departments within the EU Commission produce mainly market liberalizing policies, or whether a social dimension of the EU exists in its own right. You started to answer the question in your presentation by saying that it's really, I mean, the market is sort of stronger, but I mean, maybe I'd like you to sort of go a little bit more into this. The second thing is that in the last mandate of the Commission, in DG Markt, both the Commissioner and the Director General were more sort of, I would say, social liberal, sort of rather interventionist. When you think of a Gaullist like Barnier, I mean, it's a little bit more interventionist. Would you say, I mean, something which, on the public procurement, you give the impression that, in fact, green and social issues don't exist. I'm not an expert in the subject, but I mean, there's been all this sort of these guides, etc., and within the directives themselves, so that the local sort of authorities awarding the markets could sort of actually take social or environmental sort of directions as before the price issue. So this is another thing as well, which I'd like to sort of see, to say in the latest procurement directives, but as well on social entrepreneurship, as the last sort of couple at the head of DG Markt sort of influenced the process in a different way. Then the last question, maybe for a lot of you as well, who are sort of scholars in social policy, I presume, there is a trend in diminishing adoption of binding legislation. If you were writing this study in 10 years' time, what would you look at if there's no more directives?
Okay, if you do agree, we can take a few questions from the room. If there is a question.
Yes, thank you. I'm Frederik de Bakker. I'm a lobbyist for Telefonica, which is a telecom firm, but I have some general questions. Well, on your last slide about a more balanced access on the technocratic agency, I understand the concept, but I don't know if you could elaborate how you could implement that in a pragmatic way. And the last point, the open political competition. I think this is a very important issue because also, I mean, observing the policy making in the Commission, you sometimes see actually that the conflicts comes because the different DGs has different political objectives. And my question is then, at what point in time you think, and at what level, those political objectives should be tried to balance or merge? Because if it's done up front, I think it's very difficult because you probably sometimes those different political objectives emerge when you have a kind of dossier on the table. But then sometimes they are so deep in the services that they don't come up into political level to reach an agreement. So I think it's a very complicated thing to solve, and perhaps you have some vision on that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Just a very brief question. Did you analyze at all the role of the Commission Director Generals? What kind of actors they are? Technical, political, or what is the really role of the Director General?
Okay, I think there is
Bart van Herken from the European Social Observatory in Brussels. Great to be at this inaugural session in this new meeting room. I have two questions basically. First of all, could be because I missed the very beginning of the session. Why would you even expect the European Commission to be a unitary actor? You probably explained that, but
the literature does.
The literature does. Well, okay, but let's say all of us who are involved in any way in European politics, of course politics at any member state level, there's no such thing as a unitary political actor. People with different trainings, backgrounds. So my very intuition would be that it can never be a unitary actor. But okay, it could be the literature. But then the more serious question would be, how would you consider this kind of position taking to involve in the current climate, namely the whole Europe 2020 context, the European semester, etc. Because I think that your findings, which I find absolutely interesting and very relevant, could help us to predict in a way what's going to happen now. Because what I see from my own, what we see at the OSE from our own research, is that, for example, the number of inter-service consultations have dramatically increased in the last few years. The role of the Secretary General as a lead DG has dramatically been reinforced. SecGen, ECFIN, DG Employment, DG TaxSud are now the 4 core DGs who meet permanently at the level of Director General, at the level of country desk officers, at the level of heads of unit. They meet now much more often than they did before. And so I think what you are doing can really be extended, this kind of analysis, because in my view, with the kind of analytical tools that you put on the table, I would expect that there would be less of a policy-seeking position formation, but perhaps more technocratic position formation, because of the changes that are taking place through the European semester. By the way, about Christmas, you're totally right. The same thing happens in Belgian politics. In the memoirs of our former Prime Minister Jean-Luc Dehaene, you can read that every year, just before parliamentarians go on holiday in July, they table every possible piece of legislation because everybody wants to leave on holidays, and then of course you get a much smoother decision process. The same happens as Christmas, so you're right. Thank you.
If I may, hello, Frank Sivan Thomas, I'm with the European Commission. I'm one of those, like other colleagues in the room, who have been working for DG Employment and DG Markt, and some of the interactions you described do take place within us from time to time, so it's good to understand. Related to the last question, I wanted, and the role maybe the SecGen is playing, I wanted to ask a related question. How do you evaluate, or what role do you see for all the new tools which have been developed, notably impact assessments, roadmaps, work planning? They may seem like procedural tools, but they do control a lot, let's say, the political agenda, the agenda setting, and in particular when to get a point into the work plan, or once it's in the work plan, services have to draft a first roadmap, which already has to lay out, for example, the main policy options. At that stage, where do they come from at that stage, and are they sufficient? Normally, if the process is well done, what you describe as interventionist policies or market-based policies, they should anyway be analyzed if they are feasible and they are should be done. So is that a tool which can help to improve these processes, or does it have any other function? The second question, you referred a lot to ideological differences. We're humans, yes, but where do they come from in the interaction of these director generals, and to what extent, let's say, are they a reflection of defending a mission statement of a director general, which, let's say, may change by reorganizing director generals, or by making them bigger or smaller, by integrating certain things. DG Mark will always reply, obviously posting is not involved as we are not responsible for it. It's not written in our mission statement, so why should we deal with it? It's written elsewhere, and others would, and you can restrict it further or redefine these missions. Are they the basis for us coming across as carrying different ideologies in the corporation? That would be interesting.
There is last question. There is two questions. Okay.
It's
go.
okay. Well, my question was actually already asked.
Okay, then there is a question there.